goal. I'm going to have this in a month or 2 months. And then I wouldn't hit it and I'd be discouraged. What did I do wrong? And it's because you never see like the underbelly or like the behind the scenes of what goes into that goal.
Yeah.
Right. Like podcasting. Oh, I got to get a mic, throw up some recordings, good to go. Nope. Like there's a lot more details along the way. Like I said, I'm going to have a podcast. This was last December. I said, I'm going to have a podcast by the end of January. I didn't launch till mid-March because I get into it. Oh, I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to have this ready, that ready. I didn't realize this was involved, and that goes for everything. So what you see on the surface is just, that's it. It's the surface. It's that classic iceberg analogy, right? You see the 10%, 90% below.
Yep. And what I tell people is that it's the consistent, persistent pursuit of what you want to do. It doesn't happen overnight. And, like going back to just getting started, yeah, you can just get started, but that success is going to take a little bit of time. Unless you're an anomaly, those happen too. But it does take time and to perfect your craft. It's funny, when I started podcasting, I listened to a few shows. I liked them. I think I was listening to Guy Raz, How He Built This. It's one of the top 10 iTunes shows. I was like, okay, I get it. This is pretty cool. And my business partner at the time, he goes like, hey, if we do a podcast, that'll help drive SEO traffic towards our website, because we had an online wine business. I'm like, all right, well, what am I going to talk about? He's like, I don't know. You'll come up with something. You do all kinds of cool stuff. Just talk, So, for weeks, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? I start asking around, like, who knows how to record? Like, finally, I called a buddy that was just right in front of me, who'd been doing radio shows online forever, and he has like a podcast segment. I'm like, Jim, you got to help me out. He flies out from Arizona to California when I live there, and he's like, here's what we do. We launched the first show within 3 days. It was just my life story. I was like, you hit the launch show, like, okay, it's going public now, boom. And it's funny. I know that show was unpolished. It was raw. It was my story. But I got started. I did one, and now I'm 250 shows later, and I've helped a dozen people get their shows off the ground. I've got it figured out, but I had to start somewhere, and it was raw. And the good news is that's how I launched my consulting business, was off my first podcast show. So, you never know where something's going to lead.
You don't. Yeah. And now looking back, I'm not 250 episodes in yet, but I think, man, what if I had taken action faster? Like a year before, when I was thinking about doing YouTube, or like, where could I be now? And so people are afraid of that failure, but man, the regret of like, shoulda, coulda, woulda, is a lot worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, back to what I just said about my podcast launching my consulting career. I was working with David Meltzer, who's become a good friend now. I'd hired him to be a business coach for our online business. And I was telling him he was going to do the podcast. He's like, great. He encouraged me. And I had 3 CEOs call me the day after I launched my show. They found it on social media. I'd posted it. And they all asked me for advice. Hey, Jim, I heard your story. It sounds like I'm going through the same thing you went through. How'd you deal with it, So I called Dave on the next week's call. And if you know Dave, you get 15 minutes, man. That's it. 15 minutes. You better say what you need to say, and that's it. But so I throw it out there. I'm like, Dave, these guys are calling me. The podcast's out. He's like, Jim. He's like, sounds a lot like consulting. Have you thought about being a consultant? I'm like, no, I just got the podcast off the ground. He goes, well, you've got your peers looking to you for advice. You might want to consider consulting. I was like, wow, you have a point. So what I did is I took his advice of considering consulting. I continued to take the calls of my friends and help them through the challenges that they had. And I offered them weekly phone calls, like, yeah, call me next week. Let's hear how it's going. Next thing I knew, 3 months in, I get a call from somebody, and I literally threw out a price, like, hey, yeah, I consult. Here's the price. And they're like, yeah, great, man. Awesome. I'd love to have your help. And I hung up. I was like, wow, how'd I do that, right? So, sometimes just getting started, following a passion, something that you're good at, being transparent, which I was on my show, could lead to bigger, greater things. And
creates trust. Yeah.
Creates trust, yeah. And interestingly enough, you touched on it a little bit, is when you have an idea and you follow through on that path. We hear it from Andy. You put something out in the universe, it's going to come back to you, whether you want it or not, right? If you believe in yourself and you put it out there. one thing that I'd put out there for myself, I'm giving you a little bit of my background story here, is that I knew I wanted to move out of California into an environment where I could raise my kids. And my wife and I were already looking at Montana and Texas. And I thought, gosh, if I could make a go to this consulting thing, and I've got my online wine business, we could live anywhere in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what happened. I ramped up my consulting marketing efforts, picked up a couple of big clients, packed up the U-Haul, and moved to Montana. I've been here 3 years, survived the pandemic, which we never really saw up here. I've made more money in the last 3 years than I've ever made, and I'm raising my kids and doing what I want to be doing. So I guess the lesson there is to people like, hey, follow your dream, follow your passion. Start now. If you've got an idea, just start and get going. And just like your podcast and your story, man, anything's possible.
Yeah, I love that. I think the one caveat I would say about follow your passion in terms of making a career, like, so you could have a passion that's a hobby.
Yeah.
And then you can have a passion that makes you money.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And so if you're going to turn people don't care about your passion because it's your passion. They care about your passion if you can make it relevant and valuable to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Good.
And so that's the caveat going in, because a lot of people follow your passion. Oh, I'm an artist, or whatever it might be. And you put it out there and you're like, this is me and this is my passion. And like, everyone will love it. It's like, no, it's like at the end of the day, people are going to do what's best for them and spend their time on what's valuable to them. And so you have to turn your passion into something that is going to be useful for others. And so that's just one thing that I kind of didn't fully understand in the beginning.
Yeah, no, it's super important. You're absolutely right. I talk about values a lot with my clients, is discover what your true values are and then find the work that will accentuate those values. Because, for me, I want to be around my kids. I could go make millions of dollars back in California, but that's going to be at the cost of being around my kids and living the lifestyle that I want to live based on my values, right? So understanding what my values are, I don't care what I make here. As long as I'm with my kids, it's worked out. But, because it's aligned with my values, the work that I'm doing, I want to do. And I'm much happier because I'm seeing my kids, I'm driving them to school, I'm picking them up, So I think it's important that people understand who they are and what's important to them. And then you can chase that vision, right? So, and that's a very good point about passion. Passion doesn't always pay the bills because it doesn't always solve other people's problems, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
No,
I think that's super important. The values, like my number one value is freedom. Mm-hmm. So time freedom, location freedom. So anytime I've had an opportunity or thought about what am I going to do next over the last several years, is it time? Does it give me time freedom to a degree? Does it give me location freedom? If it doesn't, I don't really consider it, honestly. And because that's my values. That's what I value the most. Like I'd rather, structure my time how I want, live where I want, than, maybe make a little more money and sacrifice some of that.
Yeah.
So,
it's really good point. Brad, I'm going to end the show, but I'm going to talk to you offline. So thanks for sharing some of your thoughts with my listeners. I hope that they picked up a little bit of wisdom and gold in this very raw conversation. So thanks for letting me hit record. So I'm going to say bye to the listeners. Thanks for tuning in. Send in your notes, and we'll have another show for you next week. Thank you.